trust yourself. That is the number one thing, is trust yourself, trust the whispers, trust the little quiet inner voices, trust the smaller voices that are giving you instructions, even if they, from what you want to eat to what needs to, if you need sunflowers on your walls, then you need sunflowers on your walls, whatever it is, these little things, don't ever just bypass them. Don't ever just be like, I'm being silly. Whatever they are, take an opportunity to acknowledge that they exist, and there's a part of you that needs you to know whatever it is, even if it's hard.
Between you and me, right where you are right in this moment, is exactly where you were meant to be.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. Welcome to the Orgasmic Life podcast. I am your hostess, Elena Harder, and I am so glad to have you here today. If you are an awakening woman, a conscious mother, a woman on a journey to bring about the best for your family and create an enlightened experience of being a child and a woman and a mother and partner in your world, I absolutely I'm so grateful and so glad that you have found your way here. This podcast collects not only my own personal stories, things I would have done better had I known better, but also the beautiful stories of many hundreds of other women and men who have been through the consciousness awakening journey, who are here to share their stories, to inspire you to know that you can recover from mental health challenges, from postpartum depression, from challenges with traumatic births, and just the life in 21st century, as well as beautiful, actionable tips, exercises where we walk you through practical things that have really helped us, and the journey of becoming a joygasmic mother, one who handles absolutely every challenge with grace and ease and understands that everything is here to awaken her deeper, to create more empowerment and more pleasure in her life, even the challenging things. So that sounds juicy. Listen up, because we have got a wonderful episode for you today.
Fully harnessing the joygasmic potential of your body and yourself. Anything is possible, and especially we are here to tell you that deep and fulfilling love is possible and is available for you when you choose that for yourself. Hello and welcome to the Joygasmic Life podcast. Today's episode is with Ima Naviah Rose, a beautiful friend of mine who I had the pleasure of custodianing, sharing time with while she was in the last phases of her preparation for her birth. And we talked today about her 3 births. One, a challenging traumatic hospital birth when she was in her teens. The second, a beautiful orgasmic birth, fully unassisted in her 20s. And then her last one, a midwife assisted birth in her 30s, and the differences between those, the wisdom she gained along the way. We also talk some about Lotus birth, the different qualifications of what makes an orgasmic birth and what doesn't, and the impact of midwife assistance on the ability of mom to get into a beautiful flow. It's a beautiful, beautiful conversation. We get into that. And we also talk a bit about conscious conception and how it can actually happen in more than one part. Not just the physical act of conception, but also the soul coming into the body and that whole process. Ima's a wealth of knowledge and beautiful experience. And I encourage you to reach out to her if you're looking for help in your conception journey. She has some really beautiful wisdom to share there. And I hope you enjoy the episode. Well, welcome, Ima, to the Joygasmic Life podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today and share your stories of your births and learn a little bit about that journey to orgasmic birth and hear all of that. I'm so excited, and welcome to the recording. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I love birth, and I love the sacredness and the sovereignty that can be brought into the birthing world. That seems to seems to be like a radical experience these days.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that it has to be such a radical thing to actually be autonomous in the world, but it turns out these years that is a really radical thing to do, to be making your own decisions about what you want to do with your life and your body. So um can you tell us a little bit before we get into your birth story, like how did you come to be interested and passionate about birth? What was that experience like for you?
I have always been fascinated with the process of birth since I was very little. I grew up on a farm, and I was the horse doula and the cat doula and the dog doula. And
Aw.
since I was like 7, I would sleep out in the barn when the mares were being brought in and
Aw.
they were going into their birth process. And I would wake up when they started foaling and go and run and get my parents. And, so
Aw.
I was that one. I loved it. There was something very magical about being in that time and space, even with the horses, on this old cot underneath horse blankets that smelled like horse. Like and like this, it was like Christmas Eve. It was just
Yeah.
like, as a kid, Christmas Eve has this Miss magic. And that was how I always felt too on the nights where I would sleep when we knew that the mare had dropped and she was starting to go into her process. Every night I spent out there always felt like magical. And so
Aw.
I always knew that I wanted children. I had my first son quite young. I had got pregnant when I was 17. And so I've had 3 beautiful boys. The first one I was 18, then 28, and now just recently 36.
That's an
And
incredible span. Like, wow.
yeah, it's in my teens, my 20s, and my 30s for sure. All very different.
Yeah.
Um, and all the different medicine, different wisdom for sure.
Wow, beautiful. And we met through the orgasmic birth, or the sort of free birthing group that I ran. I think I just reached out to you because you had a pregnant picture on Facebook, and I was like, she's pregnant, I should just message her. And then you had just finished running a conception group with a couple of ladies, like
Mm-hmm.
sacred conception, conscious conception work. And so then a bunch of those ladies then came over, and we did sort of mom to mom support calls for several weeks, many weeks, I think, in the fall and winter of last year, which was really, really beautiful in terms of just having a group of women who were collaborative, who, hey, I'm having challenges with this. And it was like, oh, sweetheart, we all struggle with that. It's like, we went through that. That's actually normal. Sorry to tell you it's normal, but it is. But also like so comforting to go, oh, I'm not like weird. I'm not strange. And to have people to bounce those ideas off of, who were also interested in conscious birth, orgasmic birth, free birth, and that realm. So yeah, it's super beautiful to get to know you that way, and to watch your belly growing, and to see you in that that mama mode, moving around, always doing things, but then also taking the time to be with us and connect. And I have fond memories of you, like you fell asleep at the end of one of the calls. I'm like, don't wake her up. We'll just let her keep napping, It's super, super sweet. So yeah, just like beautiful memories from that. And then now connecting, seeing your little boy, he's like 6 months old now, almost five, 6 months. And it's just super, super beautiful to have that continuity of connection, and just, oh, okay, like we're still connecting and sharing that journey, even though it's been all over Zoom. It's like, oh, it's been a long distance journey, but that heart connection, the knowledge of like sharing those values around what we feel is important in mothering, even though we're all doing it in our own ways, it's been really, really nourishing for me, and I hope for you too. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's been so great, especially in these time of like, global chrysalis, where everybody is kind of in their own bubble, doing their own thing, still being able to reach out and have these like super nourishing and in-depth heart connections.
Yeah.
Yeah, that has been kind of like the mana, that has been the thing that really has made these processes become a lot more graceful. It's still
Mm,
having that community connection and that
yeah.
space. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. And how many of those ladies in that group got pregnant because of connecting with you, and because of the wisdom that you brought to that, right? So
It's actually funny. A friend of mine, oh, my partner Morgan and I were joking with a friend of mine who, we make a joke about how many babies are in this world because of me. And I think of, my friend Travis was saying that because of a connection him and I had and showed him how to manifest. And then the next time he met that way was to call a partner in that he was going to have children with, and then I drove her down to California with me, and now they have like two beautiful babies. And there's a bunch of instances like that where like connected people connected the dots, and then babies have sprung forth from these connections.
Beautiful. It's
So
like matchmaker for conscious conception and baby making. Wow, that's a unique little role there, Eva. I love it.
right. And, and that's kind of really one of the things that have fed into my passion of conscious conception and helping people really have those positive birth experiences and call in these magical babies that are here, in my opinion, to really inherit the planet that we are leaving, and in whatever shape we are leaving it, they've got a big journey ahead of them. And I feel like these are our ancestors that are returning, that are wanting to, they have a lot of wisdom to share and a lot of really powerful messages to bring. And so we're here as parents and chaperones to these incredibly beautiful and epic beings that are landing, and now is an incredible time for it. So
Absolutely. And the kids that are coming out of those conscious conceptions and the conscious parents, they're just like beautiful beings of light, like incredible. You're like, okay, if we're talking about conscious conception, like conscious conception is one of those sort of like precursors to an enlightened civilization. Is like, we want these children here. We're calling them in because they're powerful beings and because they have the ability to handle, what the next 40 years is going to bring as they're growing up in the world. And they've got parents who, I think a lot about how my parents went through the journey of stopping physical abuse, right? It was like, nope, like they got beat as children, or then there was sexual assault in the family line, stuff like that. And it's like, they were like, nope, not happening to our kids, right? And so for us as parents, we're now in the generation where we're getting to say, none of that emotional abuse, none of that like needing to lie or hide or sneak or any of those sort of more subtle forms of conflict. It's like, it's time to get those out of the equation too, so that we can really create an enlightened civilization, step into that golden age time. It's like,
absolutely. I often think about like what our children will be capable of if they're growing up without trauma, or at least with the tools to be able to integrate the life is inherently traumatic. Like it's not about divorcing or bypassing that. It's about giving them the tools of emotional regulation to be able to like roll with whatever comes up, and
right.
not have to spend their first 20-30 years healing to be able to like be a functional human and just like go out there and really share their gifts and abilities. Just having that be an inherent next step after they've grown to move into the whole time moving into these places where their unique passions and excitements are taking them.
Absolutely. Not have to spend like me. I spent like most of my 20s and part of my 30s undoing the crap from the first, 2 decades of my life. Like, that's a lot of people's journey. And some people don't even ever start that journey. It's like, oh gosh, that's like a whole other ballgame. But if we can spare them from having to undo that, I mean, Alex, my son, and I, we're talking, I'm like, hey, I'm expecting baby. Like, anybody who's at that birth needs to have resolved their birth trauma. He's 10 years old. I go, dude, we got to resolve any and all birth trauma you've had now, right? Like during this pregnancy. We're not waiting till after. We got to do that now. And so having that conscious conversation with him at 10, not at 45, not at 35, not at 25, but at 10. Hey, we're going to resolve that. And then what's possible for his life moving forward is super magical. Yeah.
I super honor that. And like, that's big work. I feel really grateful. My second son, Obi, was who I had my orgasmic birth with. I had and then my Onyx, who is 6 months, almost 6 months, I feel like he really needed that. Like his, he was cord wrapped, and so like he came in and he wasn't breathing, and so there was like a touch of anxiety that kind of came along with the initial imprint of his birth. I don't feel like it affected him. Like I feel like he was well held throughout it. Like the energy was there, but I feel like his brother's perfect birth really held such a strong anchor, and Obi was very insistent that he was there for it, and there for his brother, and he was really sure that that was a space that he needed to hold, at 7.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
powerful.
Well, there you go. You've got a generation of doulas, right? And sometimes those little children of ours, the older children, or even the younger children, they make the most beautiful doulas because they're so innocent. They've got the love. They love you. There's no doubt that they love their mamas and their papas, right? So they make really wonderful doulas in that way. Yeah. Let's dive into those birth stories, because I know you had some good gems of wisdom you want to share about sort of the some comparison or some contrasting between your second child's birth and the journey of that. And if you want to touch on your first child's birth too, we can absolutely start there and jump in on that. So yeah,
Sure.
happy to start wherever you want to start on that conversation.
Awesome. Yeah. So yeah, I like I said, I've always been really connected to birth. And when I was 16 years old, I had this like deep pull to be a mother. And it started with me very young, and it brought tears to my eyes, putting away scrapbooking stickers. It's a boy, it's a girl, and that sort of thing. It was like such a deep pull. And so Kai was he was consciously conceived as well, as consciously as I could have been, intentionally for sure. My partner and I called him in together when I was 17 and had him when I was 18. And with him, he really did show up kind of as a role. There's a book called Sacred Birthing, and I can't remember the name. It's not anime. It's a different woman that wrote it. Very good book. I absolutely suggest it. It was such a powerful guiding light for my second birth. But one of the chapters is the first child as a sacrificial lamb, and how many first children come in and they choose a harder delivery or a harder life, and they make that because they're stronger. And it's a conscious choice that they make for the benefit of their brothers and sisters that are going to come after. And that rung very, very true with Kai. And Kai came in, I was 18. I had, did everything right, like the way that, an 18-year-old might imagine to do it, coming from, a world of mainstream medical practice, did all of the tests and all of the ultrasounds and all of the appointments. I found a lady doctor that was older and mature that I thought would, had told me she had all of the opportunities to study birth and this and that and everything. I was going to do it at the hospital because that's what was safest, and the whole thing. And I was going to do it natural, and I didn't need any medication. I just, that was just what's going to happen. And we went to the baby classes, my partner and I, and we did all the things. And when it came down to it, it ended up being one of the most biggest cluster mistakes that they possibly could have had. It was trying not to swear when I talk about that.
You can swear on the podcast if you want. It's totally fine.
It was a giant clusterfuck.
Which happens often with like hospital birth, right? Like hospital birth kind of tends towards clusterfuck unless you're really lucky or you're really intentional about it.
That's right. And it was just an intervention salad, one thing after another. So, I went to 42 weeks and they induced me, and then that didn't work. So they induced me again. And then it all hit kind of at once, and it was really intense. And then the doctor had to deal with a stab wound because she double booked herself both in my thing and when she was supposed to be in the ER. So nobody came to give me permission to push, even though I knew that it was time to push. So they were making me try and hold it in, and that was making me nauseous. So they gave me Demerol and Gravol against my will. And
instead of just pushing the baby out.
Yeah. And so then that depressed his breathing, and then, and then they ended up asphyxiating. And I ended up pushing him out on my own, but like not after, the doctor finally showed up and didn't actually know what she was doing and needed another nurse to tell her how to do the things. And anyway, it was just one thing after another. It was a malpractice suit. And yeah, it ended up taking 3 years to clear that up. So it was really, and he ended up with cerebral palsy. And, he was taken away. He was resuscitated. It was a whole lot of trauma. Something that really impacted me deeply for like a decade.
Yeah.
So, there many things came out of that is totally different, another story. But it took me 10 years to kind of come into the place where I felt like I always wanted to be a mother after that, but it was like my initiation and my rite of passage to becoming a mother had been so brutally interrupted that I never got to really step forward. So I was somewhere in between. I was in this no woman's land between maiden and mother, and I wasn't really landed in either. And so I did a lot of travel. My parents ended up adopting my son because I just was ill-equipped to level his complexity of needs. So they raised him, and I would travel and then come home in the wintertime and be with him. And then I would go out and, first it was to study my education. And then it was, I found healing and festivals and learning and apprenticing and all of these things that just, I kept learning more because there was this deep wound, and I kept seeing how the medical model was failing him as he grew, continuing. It was sustaining a life that was not thriving, and it was not thriving because from what I could see was a lot to do with lobbying and the way the pharmaceutical system works and like what kind of nutrition they feed complex children. And, it's a whole, and that, like I said, is a whole big thing. But what came out of that is like this deep desire to do it differently, and knowing and studying for 10 years, a decade, how I could do it differently. And so when I was 27 and kind of right on the precipice of my Saturn return is when I was traveling down in California, and I ended up conceiving Obi, and I conceived him in 3 parts, I like to say. His bio dad came and swept into my life on a pirate ship after 3 days of catharsis alone on this pirate ship in Ventura Harbor. Gave me coconut oil, foot massages, and mangoes, and told me that he always felt like there was a wild child in his life. And I said, if we're going to do this, there's a baby spirit hanging around. And he said, well, I've always felt that there is a wild child that I wouldn't get to raise the same way as my other boys, but I still feel him there. And so there was that. And then the second part, his soul came in. I was having a beautiful tantric experience at the top of a 20-foot waterfall after bathing in the bathing pool of the gods, which we didn't know at the time, but that's what we found out the locals called it, and felt this energy rush in, and felt this piece of his soul come to me from the Yuba River and from the ancients. And that's the birth, they call that the birthplace of the Rainbow Warriors, is where they stem from. And then his third piece came to me as I did a meditation in a black oak grove on the side of Crystal Lake, in the base of Mount Shasta, or Castle Lake, not Crystal Lake. And I fell through the earth and went to the Crystal Caverns and was greeted by the fairy folk who did a womb blessing and shot lasers into my uterus, and like crystalline laser frequencies, and honored me as a divine sacred feminine vessel for bringing, helping their people, bringing this being into the world. And so Obi has come to me by
Wow.
some cards.
Yeah.
And, you know, this was during twilight on the alignment of the, it was the Lion's Gate where, you know, there was that 1 year in 2013 with all six of the stars all lined up, you know, and you can see it in the sky. So he is a magical one. And, you know,
Wowza.
he came into my life, I feel, for my personal healing and to, like, you know, really kind of heal that 10-year kind of wound in myself.
Yeah.
And also I feel like he has some purpose here in the world. You know, many of the things that have um, been shared with me, you know, is his, you know, part of his mission is to anchor magic and back into these realms.
Those
And I
fairies,
totally
right?
believe that, you know, that
Yeah.
reconnection with spirit and in a way that magic doesn't exist for us in the
Mm-hmm.
density of this plane. And for him, it was, you know, the one thing that I always felt was that I just needed to have him and everything would be fine. And I would do it unassisted. And it would be my way of reclaiming my rite of passage. And I wanted nobody there. I wanted
Yeah.
maybe one person there. I wanted to be as far away from the hospital as I could be. That was the only thing that brought me anxiety.
Yeah.
And so it was in every cell of my being, I felt that this birth would be perfect. There was
Mm.
going to be no complications. Nothing was going to be wrong.
Mm.
And I really had to fight for that because my whole family was very scared,
Yeah.
obviously. You know, they
Yeah.
didn't want anything to happen. You know, I've been told so long, they're like, oh, well, you're small and your hips are this and you're that. And all of these negative stories about how it was actually
Mm.
my fault and my body's fault that my son wasn't birthed safely was actually bullshit.
Mm.
And it was,
Yeah.
I
Totally
didn't
bullshit.
feel safe.
Yeah.
I didn't feel empowered. They were telling me things that were wrong about my body when I knew better. They were telling
Yeah.
me that because I was young, because I was indigenous, because God knows why, because they
Yeah.
have these superiority complexes. And there's this medical way of treating birth that is counterproductive and counterintuitive.
It's
And
like,
it's incredible, really. And so with Obi, I got to create my ceremony. And I got to
mm.
meditate with him every night and talk to him every night and hear what he had to say and what he needed for his birth. Because it wasn't just
Mm.
about me and what I wanted. And that's
Right.
the one, it's a dance between the mother and the child, or the mother and father and child, or the mother and father and siblings and child. Whatever
Yeah.
the family dynamic is that's needs to be honored. But first and foremost, it is giving the child that is coming into this world the sacredness and the container and the ceremony that they need to transition into their body safely and gracefully as
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And really the cornerstone of that anchoring is safety for and feeling of safety for the mother, feeling of joy and pleasure for the
Yeah.
mother is such a
Yeah.
huge part. With Obi, it was really magical. I felt myself going into pre-labor on the full moon. It was a full moon eclipse, and but for five
Wow.
days he would just start moving down from the full moon till his birth. Every evening around 7 o'clock till 10 o'clock, I would get those gentle, undulating
Mm.
waves of energy and feeling him slowly settling down into the birth canal. And then um, one day I didn't fall asleep at 10 o'clock. I was still wide awake at 11. And I'm like, I think this is the night. And so my
Mm.
roommates boiled water on the stove because our hot water was out for some reason. And they carried it upstairs so that I could have a hot bath. And I just, breathed and really took that time to sit in the water and feel myself opening with every breath and just being present to that
Mm.
and really anchoring into my and everything was calm and it was very quiet. And once I lost my mucus plug, I was working my breasts and nipples and just like massaging myself and really feeling safe in my own space and feeling myself open. And then when the mucus plug came out, I felt like it was time to transition from the water. My little Aries wanted nothing to do with it. And I found my body pillow and on the floor and rode my body pillow just like full over the top. I, did manual stimulation on my clitoris and just like, lots of, and swirling my hips and just like doing the big circles with my hips and moving around and letting, like, if moans wanted to come out, allowing, rather than it wasn't a primal experience. It wasn't a big raw kind of experience. It was a very sensual, quiet, internal. Nobody bothered me. If I needed something, a smell, or I created altars, and so I had first stage, second stage, third stage. And I had
beautiful. I want to hear more.
chocolate. I had mushroom chocolate, not like psychedelic, but like, lion's mane and cordyceps mushroom chocolate. And, good smells and massage oil and perineum oil. And I had been doing a lot of perineum massage leading up to that with a herb salve with coconut oil and marshmallow root and comfrey or calendula rather. Comfrey comes after. Comfrey's for healing, calendula is for stretching. And just like really allowing myself, and I had, leading up to that, was giving myself tons of orgasms, really getting juicy, really allowing myself into that sacred sensual space.
And was that during your birth or sort of prior, like during your birthing time?
Birth,
or prior, like sort of those days beforehand?
Leading up to it. Yeah. So weeks beforehand, tons of orgasms, tons of yoga, and really tuning into myself and the whispers of the baby and what the baby wanted. And then, but then also doing like external stimulation and turning that, almost that fiery stretch of the yoni, turning that into pleasure by massaging it and breathing into it and just allowing that energy to flow down. In my mind's eye, I visualized, my friend said, figure out what 10 centimeters looks like and just keep that circle in your mind. And so when I went to do that, I saw that with 10 petals. And so every petal that bloomed was was how many centimeters I was dilated. And as soon as all 10 of the centimeters or 10 of the petals came and I was fully dilated, that's when I felt those like really deep, like womb pushes, like, and from there, I really wanted to be in the dark. So I got up and I moved to the bathroom and I just like kind of alternated between sitting over the toilet and like turning around and being braced on the toilet. And that's where I did most of it took 4 big pushes for him to come down before he started crowning. And that's when I called my witness in. I had one witness who had midwifery training, but wasn't a registered midwife, trained in Peru and North Carolina, and drove up from Portland because one of my friends was like, there's a girl here at the farm and she's just going to have her baby here. And I think she needs you. And so I'm really
just
grateful.
Drove up.
She just drove up with her and her dog, and she's amazing. She's absolutely amazing. Cecilia Mountain Tree. She's just a fantastic, folk herbalist and midwife that, studied wise woman she is. And she studied the healing arts for all of her American friends that couldn't afford healthcare. And so she studied the healing arts so that she could support her community. She's really amazing. And, so she felt I needed her assistance, not because I needed her to catch for anything, but because it was so fast and so graceful. I had a hard time believing it. That was his crowning. And he was in the call as well. So it didn't feel like a little head. It felt rubbery. I was like, I need some eyes down there and see what's. And so when she got there, she's like, it's that's him. He's crowning. Maybe we'll just breathe through a couple, and I'll give a little bit of back pressure. And um, and so we did that. And as he was coming forth, she looked up at me with these beautiful big blue eyes and said, "It reminds me of the kitten." And that was referring to my last cat. Um, met me at the door while she was pregnant. She got pregnant on her first heat, and she swirled around under the covers while I was trying to take a nap and had the first kitten right in my hand. And so I told her that story. And so when she looked at me, she's like, "It reminds me of the kitten." And I just laughed, and he just shot out because I laughed. And
absolutely, because it's all that diaphragmatic contractions and moving,
totally.
and absolutely, yeah.
And yeah, and he just kind of shot out, and there he was, and he was perfect and beautiful and breathing and giggling himself and smiling, and he was just bright-eyed and was so present. And all I could say for over and over and over was, "You are so perfect." And the whole time, it wasn't like there was a when you think of orgasmic, it's more like a state of being, because it was
absolutely.
totally ecstatic. It was, I would call it a pain-free birth. It was like my soul and my body were resonating at a frequency that was higher than this earthly plane. And the energy wasn't translating into pain. It was in translating in forms of intensity, but like this intensity that was also joyous and blissful. And every time I pushed, I didn't feel pain. There was no resistance. It was just this joy of bringing my baby into this world and allowing his soul to run through me and down and into his body, and just being like this lightning bolt for him. And just like holding it and being on my feet in this warrior goddess pose, like deep goddess stance, and just calling him deeply into this world. And it was perfect. And because I feel like it was perfect often because it was uninterrupted. And that's the difference between Kai's, which was wildly interrupted, and Onyx, who was my most recent baby, who wasn't wildly interrupted. He was only like slightly interrupted, but those tiny interruptions made a big difference in my ability to stay in that realm.
Stay up there, right? Stay up, because you're talking about here's the physical where we normally operate, and then here's that like spiritual psychic realm that's a different space that so many pregnant and birthing moms talk about, like labor land. It's this altered space of reality that we go into to connect with the soul of our babies and call them in, right?
It was a very psychic experience. And so with Onyx, I instead decided to go with a midwife. Again, listening to this whisper voices of the soul, I felt like there was going to be a medical necessity for having the midwife there. I couldn't pinpoint it. I didn't know what it was. I just knew inside. Whereas Obi, every cell of my being knew everything was going to be perfect. I didn't need that person. Whereas this one, I'm like, he's a wild card. I feel it. I feel like he is here to do deeper work. And that I'm going to need a midwife. I just knew that. There was like, that's the same way I knew that I didn't, I knew that I did. And I found that because she was a registered midwife, it was her duty, her obligation to check the heartbeat of the baby every 15 minutes or so. She was actually really good, and she pushed it for me to 45 minutes. But there is still, it was almost like in that 45 minutes, I would just get into my flow. I would be doing my thing, and then she'd have to do it. But he was so low down that I'd almost have to be like this, like leaning back and giving her. And it was just like, that is not a safe feeling for me. And it was painful every time, and it just didn't feel right. And every time I had to like okay, get back into my headspace. Like I have a little bit of ADHD here. And so like going from one transition to another is often difficult. And I found
oh my gosh.
that was such a big thing.
Yeah.
And like in the moment, it was like, yeah, okay. But afterwards, reflecting back, I'm like, no, that was the difference.
Yeah. Well, and
But
because 45 minutes is not that long, but to somebody who's not in relationship with time, right? Like when you're birthing, like you disconnect the frontal cortex that thinks about time and logistics and all of that jazz is literally off. And
yeah,
so, having somebody even just like checking in at regular intervals that are related to their sense of clock time triggers and goes like, oh, clock time, right? And then not to mention you're now not in your intuitive movement of your own body, going like, I got to rotate my hips now, I got to move in the way that I want to move, whatever that might be. You're now sort of back in that prone on your back position of, like, what do we do? The vaginal, the pap smears, like nobody likes those, right? So it's like reminiscent of the pap smear, and you're like, okay, like fine, I guess this is what we're doing, right? So you're totally out of your own integrity in terms of what you want in that moment, which is what you want in that moment is like a very animalistic, self-directed experience.
that's right.
Versus something that's being managed in any way, shape, or form, even a kind, loving shape or form from somebody else, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Absolutely. And so I feel like with Onyx, I did share a very orgasmic experience with him as well, in the form of my partner and I had a lot of beautiful time together leading up to it. And in fact, it was he went 41 weeks and 3 days. So Obi was 42 weeks as well and came right on 42 weeks. Kai was 42 weeks induced, and Onyx was 41 and 3. And, my partner and I were really leading up to it. He made a point of, giving me lots of orgasms. And even the night before, we did ceremony to call him forward, and we did that, and then called him forward and called open the gates. And because those orgasmic feelings, like the orgasms that come, those are things that actually prepare your uterus. So like there's both like the semen from the man that loosens up the cervix and ripens the cervix, and then there's the actual oxytocin flushes that come from the woman that prepare the uterus. So it's like a twofold preparatory process. And
that's right.
So we did the ceremony to call him Earthside in the evening, and the orgasms that I had from that, I felt ripple all the way through the night. Morgan stayed up all night meditating, and in the morning we made love again. But like I could tell when he was inside me that like things were still moving from the night before. And so when I received that orgasmic space, the orgasm pulses, the rushes, that undulating like feelings of bliss, they never went away at all. They didn't die out. That just carried through into the progression into labor. So, even though the kind of pain-free ecstatic part was like kind of like had this ebb and flow to it, the orgasmic aspect and like that like really juicy goodness really was had tons of continuity to flow into. I went and ran myself. I let Morgan have a nap, and I ran a bath just for myself, and I just like really, again floated in that energy and really like allowed myself to be in that juicy mama space, and really rode on those waves. And I put on a playlist that I had made, an ecstatic dance playlist that I had made for a program the year before, and just allowed all of the combined energy that went with that playlist and the healing work that I had created. It was a 21-day program, but it was like kind of one of the central days on. And so I had been listening to that all that year. And, and so by the time my midwife got there and I was out and I was dancing because it was like the dancing part. And she's like, "You're just going to dance that baby out of there." And I was like, "I might, you know?"
Yeah.
And, you know, as it turned out, the water, we had to boil a bunch of water again because I took too long in the bath. And then I'm like, I really just need to shower on my own. I need to wash. I need to wash my hair. I needed to I need to scrub. Like, I don't know. It just it was like this thing that I often take that bath and shower time to prepare myself for ceremony. And so that's what I was preparing for. And by the time that was done, I'd used all the hot water. So they had to boil and kettle and do all the things. But I had really great doulas and I had really great midwives. And, you know, they did all the things.
It's a good way to keep them busy too, right? It's a good way to keep them busy and out of the space. Be like, go boil water.
That's
Sit
right.
And watch it. Have fun.
Yeah. And then my main doula was really amazing in the way that she knew that she didn't need me physically, or didn't need her physically, but she, you know, she was an energetic doula, like along her mom's side as well. And so she was able to bring that energy and clear any energy fields that were going on. So, but yeah, he ended up coming in the world and it was very powerful and very beautiful, but he was cord wrapped. And so there was some resuscitation that needed, but on the bright side, my midwife was just beautiful. And she was, really a mature midwife. Like, she had a lot of experience, 25 years. And so she knew that as part of our birth plan, I wanted to have a Lotus birth and stay connected, as that the part that's really important. And so she brought him to my chest and we were able to do the resuscitation on my chest. And I was laying back and Morgan had me from behind, and then Obi was witnessing from the side, all in the pool together.
Wow.
And so, you know, we still got to have this beautifully connected, even though it was, for me, it was really triggering. Like, I actually spent the first few weeks in a bit of a trauma trigger dissociate, because that was like rehashing Kai's birth story to me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But we got to do it. We got to replay it in a way that was right. So, you know, it went the way that it could have gone, like with resuscitation, with all of that. So it, you know, a lot of the first few months of Onyx's life was bringing up triggers from Kai, because Kai had passed on before he was born. Like, he passed 4 years ago from his cerebral palsy complications. And in my opinion, he had ascended. We did a week of ceremony and he was so peaceful and grateful to be graduating from that body and that life.
I know, baby. Is it mama time? It's mama time.
There you go. Yeah, and then we called Kai back.
Yeah,
ascended.
Kai told me that he would send a part of his essence with this one. And I didn't know what that meant.
Aww.
And so, but he does. He looks a lot like his big brother, and is very aware and you know, there was a bunch of stuff at the beginning, medical type stuff, that reminded me of Kai. But everything turned out for the best.
Better. Yeah. Baby. He's like, I just need some mama. I just need some mama milk. Yes, I do. And some loving. Yeah.
So, like,
that's
where
beautiful.
He had a different sort of orgasmic energy in his birth.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and it's beautiful because, you know, you sort of said, well, I had an orgasmic birth with my second and not so much with my third, but I love the way that Deborah Pascali-Bonaro defines it. She defines orgasmic birth as any birth in which there's any pleasure whatsoever, right? Yeah. You're like, you have orgasms at the beginning, you have a birth orgasm, like as the baby's coming out, whatever, right? Just like intimacy, orgasm is, you know, not just the clitoral, but also the G-spot and the oh my god, my brain, the cervix
and anal. There's like, just all sorts of spots.
all kinds of orgasms, and then energetic orgasms, which don't necessarily
Yes,
involve the
spiritual
physical body
orgasm.
particularly at all. Spiritual orgasms, eargasms, elbowgasms. Like it's just like the body being in that like oceanic love, like flow, right? And so when I heard you tell the story, I'm like, you absolutely had 2 orgasmic births, because you're talking to me about how this like energy of that lovemaking not only created the baby, obviously, but also like permeated and flowed through that experience. And then, it's interesting and beautiful that you had this ability. I'd be curious about the cord wrap, because like, what did they actually do in that moment? So did you end up staying connected with the cord and having that sort of Lotus birth experience?
We did get to, so she unwrapped him and he was floppy and blue and not breathing. So we put him on her
Yeah.
chest, rubbed him, and
Yeah.
all I could think to do was to just talk to him and to
Yeah.
tell him that we loved him and we were there, and to call him in and to invite
Yeah.
his soul to come back into his body. And it took about a minute or so,
Yeah.
but it took about a minute or so, but he did come back and he was good, and he screamed his biggest screams that but they were so powerful, and like he was so here and ready to live, and you could
Yeah.
tell that.
Yeah.
And we ended up doing a 3-day Lotus birth, because that to me seems to be like what both Obi and Onyx wanted, was 3 days. And one of the big pieces of medicine that I received with Obi was that the placenta itself carries part of the consciousness of the baby, and because it's an external organ. And so when they're coming into their body, when they're gathering up all of their soul wisdom from the Gaiam tree, it doesn't, it takes them days. Could take them up to a week sometimes for them to gather all the energy and embody it and bring it into their little new form that's Earthside, and create that connection. And so they're able to do that most of their consciousness is able to do that, dip into the body and bring some of its wisdom with it, on its own pace when it's a Lotus birth. So when the cord is still connected and the placenta is anchoring and holding space, the majority of the spirit of the baby can and make that journey as gracefully and smoothly as possible, and take as long as it wants to take. And then once they're firmly in their body, then you can do a releasing ceremony and release the placenta, and do what you will with it. Whether it doesn't work very well if you're wanting to eat the placenta, but neither of my babies, I couldn't. It just didn't. That wasn't what they called for me. Obi had a very deep visceral reaction to the concept, and then Onyx just it just didn't
Wasn't
work.
on
Wasn't
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah.
But it was less
And
of a visceral reaction to it.
Yeah. And how could you tell sort of when they were ready to be disconnected? Was there something that you saw in the babies or in yourself?
Yeah. So in the babies, they would start to grab at it, pull it with their toes. Like it would
Okay.
start to get in the way.
Yeah.
And because it turns them to rawhide within the first day, so you kind of have to put it where it is, and you have to be really locked into the bed, not wanting to pass the baby around too much, not wanting, because that will move and pull and things like that. So you really want to be mindful of it. And I feel like both with Obi and with Onyx, our families were just too active to that up, and so it was starting to be more irritating than useful, because they're in their body now, they don't need it. Is beyond the need of it being there, and you could physically tell just the way they were getting grumpy about it or pulling it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And I think also, I mean, the wisdom around keeping the cord intact and letting the placenta come out while the cord's intact, like there's so much been written about that in terms of the health benefits, and making sure all the blood from the whole placenta makes its way into the baby, and all of that, right? Yeah. And then go ahead.
I was going to say, for the first hour or two, until the whole cord has stopped pulsing to not cut, because that 30% of the baby's blood is still within the placenta. So there's still a huge amount of blood. But then after that, beyond that, I feel is like for the spiritual works, is for the, the graceful emergence into this physical form. And beyond that, then I haven't discovered any necessity beyond that personally.
Yeah.
May see it differently, experience it differently.
But everybody gets to choose their own path with that, right?
Okay.
And well, ideally we get to choose our own path, right? With Alex, I thought I got to choose my own path, and like the hospital birth said otherwise.
Totally.
Sort of like, but I remember by the time I thought to ask about the placenta, which was probably like 2 hours later, like they were like, "Oh, it's medical waste by now," and I'm like, "What do you mean it's medical waste?" Like I thought I might eat that. I thought like. There were like many ideas I had about what I might do with a placenta that all went whoosh out the window, in the process of labor, because obviously it's very consuming, and any of your future planning self just like turns the heck off. So
I think that is a big issue with the medical system, is they're just like, oh, that's medical waste. There's nothing sacred about a placenta, when I feel like there's so much that's sacred about a placenta. Like you look at it and like you can see the tree of life.
Yeah.
You can see the, all the veins and the stem, and it's just like it's absolutely beautiful. With onyx, I didn't have somebody that could read one, but with Obi, I did. Cecilia did, and she was able to read his placenta, and like it's almost like a process of divination.
Wow.
How to read the placenta, how it comes out, where the blood clots are, if there is any, how with Obi, because he was born in the caul, and then when the placenta came out, his amniotic sac flipped around the placenta.
Oh, wow.
And so like it held it. And she was saying, that it really shows this little being, like how attached to his mummy is going to be and how protective. And it's true. Like Obi's 7, he's my little like fierce mama protector. Like he is always there to like, help take care. And she was able to like point out parts where there was like blood clots and things, and like how that would like, that's healing on the past, and there's the mother side and the baby side, and both of them are different. And it was just fascinating. I want to learn that. Like I want to learn how to read the placentas, and
so many. There's so many like little intricacies around birth of like things to learn. Like there's so much. We're literally just going to spend our lifetimes learning, and then I picture myself as like a 60-year-old lady who just walks into a room and everybody chills the heck out and goes like, "Oh, everything will be fine. I feel so good. Why do I feel so good?" You're like, "Oh, Elena's here. Great." I go, "Bring the gasm with us. No problem." Like, right. So, and you too. And you too. Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to share about, you mentioned with Onyx, sort of this postpartum journey of healing that initial birth trauma, that first birth trauma through that early postpartum period.
Totally.
Is there anything you wanted to share around that?
Sure. Yeah. Like, it's interesting because I had such a wildly traumatic first birth. I feel like Obi, in his way, also healed a part of that, because Kai was still alive, but there was still that actual birth trauma that was being healed. And so while I was having an ecstatic experience with Obi, I was also like rewriting. It's almost like a rewritable CD. Like, you could just like go gloss, like reprint right over top of it. So I was like, I'm existing in both timelines at the different stages of transition. What happened in Kai's story and how it was happening in Obi's story, and how that was like healing and overriding that trauma as it went. Whereas with Onyx, it was like, he was born and he was blue and floppy, and they, had to be resuscitated. All of those things were triggering. And then having to, my milk needed to be regular. So was pumping a lot and having to pump a lot. So that reminded me of being in the hospital, and
Mm.
and then he's a really fantastic dreamer, and so his eyes will like kind of, when he's falling asleep, his eyes will roll and he'll blink and he'll stare off. And so, but he was doing it so exaggeratedly when we had to go to the pediatrician. And she was like, it was like he had to go for an EEG to make sure that it wasn't seizure activity. And,
Mm.
so, and then when we were at the EEG, which was the first thing I took Kai to as well, because of course he had cerebral
Mm.
palsy and brain trauma from asphyxiation. And we didn't know if he had, how long he had been wrapped, how long he hadn't been breathing, those things we didn't
Yeah.
know. So we had to do an EEG, which was my first thing I took Kai to. And it was funny because I was there, and then they said the name of the nearest neurologist that was going to be reading his scans, and it was the same one that read for Kai.
Whoa.
And so at that point, I just started laughing because I'm like, oh my God, it's just a big cosmic joke. And now I feel like I'm in on it. But up until
Mm.
that point, all of these things were so triggering. I'm like, oh my God, it's like all these things happening again. And then I realized, I'm like, well, it's not, it's just happening again. So that this energy, these untended parts of myself that that I just
Mm.
had to dissociate from at the time
Right.
because I was so young and I didn't have the tools, they were being
Yeah.
brought up. And so that I, as a mature woman and mother, and healer, could tend to those in a good way,
Mm.
so that so that those wounds would be healed for myself, but also for my
Yeah.
children in their birth story.
Wow.
So it was quite the process, and it was quite a lot. I had a bunch of physical health things, like I pulled my back on the third day, just trying to get takeout from the door. They didn't tell us that there was like 8 cans of pop in there, so I was like expecting like a pizza, and ended up with like something that was way too
Super
heavy for me to
heavy.
be lifting.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot,
Mm.
all at once. And so there was a lot of healing, but I do feel like that is part of birthing and part of motherhood and part of the whole process, and journey, is, when we start being really conscious and aware of, these intergenerational patterns, and then we have the opportunity to heal from them,
Mm.
you know. and
Absolutely.
and that's such a gift to be able to give our children, is to do that work, like you were saying, the cycle breaking and emotional healing,
Yeah.
um, so that we don't carry those wounds and those traumas into their lives. And
Absolutely.
they're going to mirror us and, reflect back to us, and children, and that's part of chaperoning the ancestors. Like, that's part of chaperoning these children as they grow. They will constantly be a almost immediate feedback portal on how you're behaving and how you're acting and what you're doing. And,
Straight up.
are you walking your walk? And, they'll call you on it, or they'll embody it and they will mirror it back right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Will they ever? Such a big deal.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I want to be really respectful of your time, Ima. I'm so grateful for these beautiful stories and just that, hearing your journey and that experience, all those different experiences. I'm curious, before we close up today, are there any words of wisdom or anything you wish that you would have known way back that you'd like to share with people who'll be listening to this later?
Trust yourself. That is the number one thing, is trust yourself, trust the whispers, trust the little quiet inner voices, trust the smaller voices that are giving you instructions, even if they, from what you want to eat to what needs to, if you need sunflowers on your walls, then you need sunflowers on your walls, whatever it is, these little things, don't ever just bypass them. Don't ever just be
Mm.
like, I'm being silly. You know, Whatever they are, take an opportunity to acknowledge that they exist, and there's a part of you that needs you to know whatever it is. Even if it's
Mm.
hard, even if it's a worry, even if it's traumatic, even if it's like, I'm like, oh, I've had a baby all by myself. Why do I need a midwife? Well, I needed a midwife in this situation because the situation was different and I needed to trust that, and I didn't need to get caught in my, my ego about it. Even if it led to a different outcome, it was the right outcome, So trust yourself. That's, I think, the biggest aspect about birth. And,
absolutely.
And do your work while you're pregnant. So where you can really let your pregnancy be the boss and take care of yourself in the way that you need to take care of yourself, and honor the triggers and the things that are coming up, and just don't bypass any of that. It's all part of the magic and the medicine, and it's really important.
And if you try and bypass it, it'll just show up in your labor, and
it will,
it's more tricky.
It'll make it trickier, and it'll be more challenging, and you don't want it. Do yourself a favor.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you so much, Ima. Is there anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up today? Oh, how people get a hold of you, that part. And then also whatever just came up for you when I asked you the question.
So I absolutely am consulting for doing conscious conception and ceremony building for the birth. I'm down in Vancouver Island, so I'm also open to doing doulaship and in-person birth work. But I can also consult just for the sacred aspects and the ceremonial aspects, and child communication and calling in souls and all of those sort of things. My email right now is Sarah, sarah.gautreau@gmail.com. And but you can find me on Facebook or Insta. Sacred Sovereign Life is my Insta.
Beautiful.
And Ima Naviah Rose is my Facebook. So find me.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Such good wisdom. I just feel so filled up listening to your stories, and I'm so glad to get to, finally hear them. We talked in briefly about them in our mom circles, but to get to hear the full story, I mean, even just like the summarized version of the full story is so beautiful today. I'm super grateful for that.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful to be able to share and connect, and I can't wait to hear more of your stories, and feels so good.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the end.
How easily can you imagine that this experience is integrated already deeply into every cell of your being in such a way that you will begin to notice that you have already been operating from this new behavior for a while, and that it was simply a matter of noticing how much you've already been doing this. You may choose to feel that this moment is the moment that completely and utterly into your body. Or in the days and weeks ahead, getting curious about how fully and completely this experience has transformed your life, realizing that you are at complete choice to choose how you would like to integrate this information into every cell of your being.
Thank you so much for being a part of the Joygasmic Life podcast, and I am so grateful to have you here and be a part of it. If you haven't already, head over to joygasm.me to check out our Joygasmic Birth Blueprint ebook and course, which give you all of the information that you need to become a Joygasmic mama, whether you are postpartum or whether you're expecting your first baby. This course absolutely has tips and tricks for you that will help prepare you for birth, prepare you for the birth of your next child, and prepare you for peaceful and joygasmic mothering on the other side. So Absolutely. The way that we do one thing is the way that we do everything. And so by utilizing and beginning to build a practice of joygasmic alchemy, you will absolutely become a better mother and hold space, as I am and as many, many women are, for the enlightenment of the planet. We do that first by working on ourselves and then offering that support and that enlightened nature within ourselves to our families. And then from there, it ripples out. So if you haven't already checked that out, go check that out now. Again, it's joygasm.me. We've also got courses on rescuing your relationship, bulletproof mom, how to be able to handle even the most intense toddler or special needs child later on in life, as well as a multitude of new courses that are coming out. We're absolutely grateful to get to have you as a part of that. And remember, anyone who participates in the funding of the podcast absolutely gets a membership access, which allows you to access the bonus features, the ends of some of our episodes, exercises from our guests, as well as featured free content from them. So super glad to have all of you who are a part of that already here. And thank you so much for being a part of the Joygasmic Life family. If I could leave you with only one tip for how to be an orgasmic, joygasmic mama in this world, the invite would be to really step into and embody the knowledge that you are actually here for a reason, and that reason is to be an enlightened being for your family. They chose you for a reason. They chose you on this consciousness journey for a reason. And you absolutely have the tools and skills to be able to do this. If you're struggling, please reach out. I am more than happy to help people rewire what's going on in their brain, create a new story, and create a more powerful experience so you can be the kind of mama for your kids that you really have dreamed of. You absolutely deserve it, and your children absolutely deserve it. I look forward to getting to know you more, and I look forward to co-creating through the membership content. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you on the next podcast.